The microbiome is this scientific revolution that's taking place right now that is transforming the way that we think about medicine, thinking about biology, and even, thinking about the way that we interact with the world around us. And it's crazy because it comes from such a place of humility where, this is pretty much poop. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And 20 years ago, no one had any interest in this topic, poop, or how that could even possibly be anything of any value. And now here we are. And there was, effectively a laboratory breakthrough that we needed in 2006 to allow us to do this type of research. And at the same time, our computers caught up. And it allowed us to discover this world that is a part of our body that we previously were missing, covering our skin, inside our mouth, inside our nose, on our eyeball, believe it or not, but most concentrated inside of our colon, which is our large intestine. In that spot, you will find 38 trillion living microorganisms, mostly bacteria, also some fungi. But this is a complex, diverse ecosystem of life inside of us, not a part of the human body, and yet connected to the parts of human physiology that are so necessary for health, like connected to our digestion, which is access to nutrients, our metabolism, immune system, hormones, mood, brain health, energy levels, genetic expression. It's even as a medical doctor, I find it bizarre to think that the most important part of human health could be the part of us that's not even human. It's crazy.
Well, before we get into the specifics, how to build that up and to assess where we're at when it comes to our microbiome, let's talk about some of the biggest things in today's world that are impacting it in a negative way.
A lot has changed in the last 100 years. If you think about where we are today relative to where we were for our, perhaps great-grandparents, so much of what we spend our time doing just wasn't really there before. We didn't have cars. We didn't have electronics. We didn't have televisions or computers or smartphones. And, now it's like I get a message on my iPhone once a week and it's like, congratulations, your iPhone usage is down 14%. You're only using it 8 hours a day now. And I'm like, oh, it's horrible. So you think about how much life has changed, and it's not just a lifestyle thing. Probably the biggest thing in terms of shaping and molding our microbiome are our dietary choices, the food that we put into our mouth. And the reason why this is so important is because your food choices ultimately will come into contact with these gut microbes. And so whatever is in that sort of mix of choices, whatever that big picture looks like. Again, like one meal is not going to change everything for you. But one meal repeated multiple times over, that is going to change things. And, here we are, and the average person in North America is like 55 or 60% ultra-processed foods. They didn't exist 100 years ago, right? So we have shifted very, very quickly towards a wildly different dietary pattern. And it puts a strain on these microbes, particularly because part of, sort of my platform and my argument is that, like, for example, the idea of the paleo diet. Well, 100 years ago, you really had no choice. There were no processed foods. So you basically had to be some version of a paleo diet where it was basically meat and fruits and vegetables and whole grain seeds, nuts, and legumes. Like that was it. And, now we have to create special dietary patterns to force or motivate people to eat the way that people did 100 years ago. And one of the things that we're really missing is fiber. And so fiber turns out to be, I think, crucial crucial in terms of supporting and nurturing this community of microbes. And we can get into more of why that is, but the bottom line is that, here we are, and 95% of people in the United States don't get enough fiber. And a big part of the reason why is because we're eating this very high ultra-processed food diet.
Well, we're going to go deep into fiber today. And I think for a lot of people, they've heard the word fiber. They have a general understanding. They've probably heard about soluble versus insoluble. And for a lot of people, when they think fiber, they probably think of a supplement that maybe their mother or their grandmother had, that white powder that you mix into water to make sure you're having regular bowel movements. So let's break it down. Let's talk about what fiber is, start really top down, and then we'll get into some of the nuances.
Yeah. Fiber is due to be completely sort of remade in our minds. We have to let go of sort of the preconceptions of fiber of the past and acknowledge this new look fiber that is so exciting. Like, the science in this area is so exciting. And so what is fiber? Fiber, first of all, is a carbohydrate. If you were to look at the chemical structure, not to get super nerdy, but basically it's a whole bunch of sugar molecules that get linked together, but linked together in a complex way where it's like a very long chain of these sugar molecules that can't easily be disrupted or broken up. And you'll find fiber naturally occurring in nature. Like, it doesn't have to be this white powder thing. It's actually quite easy to find fiber in nature because every single plant species, whether you eat it or you don't eat it, has fiber. It naturally occurs and exists within plants. And they almost have a monopoly on fiber. There are exceptions. You can find fiber in mushrooms. Mushrooms technically are not plants, they're actually fungi. But like, aside from that, for example, in mammals, we don't have fiber as a part of our body. It just is not there. So, fiber is biochemically complicated. I actually was a chemistry major in college. And when I look at fiber molecules, I'm like, what is that? And I kind of stop right there because I would get a headache if I tried to figure out what I'm looking at. So to keep it simple, we've broken it up into two main categories that you alluded to a moment ago, which is soluble and insoluble fiber. And these words, basically what they mean, soluble means that if you put it into a glass of water and you stir it, it will dissolve and it will disappear. Whereas insoluble fiber is more like the classic view of fiber, which is roughage, grit, something that just doesn't go away. And, the idea that most people have about fiber is it's like this inert thing that, yeah, you have it in your diet, but it just kind of sweeps through and then like, boom, launches out the other end like a torpedo, right? That's what people think fiber is. That's actually partially true, but it's missing the exciting part, which is that many types of fiber, particularly the soluble fiber, turns out to be food for our gut microbes. And it passes through the intestines unchanged because as complex as we are as humans, we actually lack the enzymes to break down fiber. But we have a microbiome. It lives inside of our colon. And that microbiome is actually something that we evolved with them. And we outsourced fiber digestion to them. This is actually their responsibility. We need them to do this for us. So fibers will basically work its way through your small intestine, which is, 15 feet, 5 meters long, and arrive into the colon. Boom, here come the microbes. And they get to work. And the enzymes that we lack, that we don't have, they have them. And they will start to apply those enzymes working like literally as teams. Like if you had a microscope and you zoomed in on fiber, you would see a team of working microbes all doing their part to break down and process it. And when they do this, a couple really special things happen. First, these microbes grow stronger. This is their food. We're actually feeding them. And they're as alive as you and I are. They need food. But the second thing is that they reward us. Thank you for giving me a meal. let me do this to give you something back that's even better than what you gave me. And the reward are short chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate. And these are the most healing, most anti-inflammatory molecules that I have come across in my 20 years of study in medicine. And if you dig into the medical literature at all and start reading up on these things, you're going to be blown away by like how they are just all over the body having these healing effects. And the way that we get them is quite simply fiber in our diet coming into contact with microbes in our colon. So the short of it, Jesse, is that fiber is food for our gut bugs. And when our gut bugs are fed, they pay us back in spades with anti-inflammatory molecules.
I'm excited to introduce you to Organifi Red Juice. This caffeine-free drink will give you an energy boost. It contains powerful adaptogens made with real berries, and it's sweetened with monk fruit. Click the link in the description to save 20%. And now back to the show. It seems like lately there's been this trend of people, you talked about paleo, but taking that even further and having an all meat or carnivore diet. And now that we do have this technology to analyze the gut microbiome, I'm curious, have you seen any of the data? What is that showing with people that are having no fiber at all? And what they're doing is, like you explained, it would be starving the gut microbiome.
Well, that's the rational thought, right? I mean, you hear this story and that's where a normal person comes to. And unfortunately, the problem that we have with the carnivore diet, let me say this before we even jump into the carnivore diet. I'm a believer that we need to be balanced and honest when we have conversations about nutrition, that it shouldn't just be like everything is bad or everything is good. And I can find good in almost any diet. And the good that I would find in the carnivore diet is that you are eliminating ultra-processed foods, and it gives people a very powerful framework to do that. And I hear these stories about people, these are anecdotes, but I don't doubt them. I don't think they're lying and making stuff up. I hear these stories about people who say that they've healed, for example, autoimmune diseases by going carnivore. And how can you rectify that? And I think that the answer from my perspective is that they have effectively eliminated processed foods. And the processed foods are what are creating that confusion in the immune system. So I have to give that to the carnivore diet. But the problem is we have quite simply almost no data like on anything with regard to the carnivore diet. As far as I can tell, there's one study, and it was a survey study, and it was people telling you how they felt. And that's about it. When it comes to questions about the gut microbiome, the thing that's interesting actually, Jesse, is that there was a study done in 2014, and it was by a guy at Duke University. His name's Warren David. This was not carnivore wasn't even part of our nutritional vernacular at the time. There's no such thing. But what he did in this study is he wanted to know, quite simply, can you change a person's microbiome by changing their diet? And he chose intelligently two polar extreme diets. One was a completely plant-based diet, high in fiber, obviously high in carbohydrates. And the opposite was an effectively almost zero carbohydrate, completely animal product-based diet. So meat, eggs, and dairy. And it's a quick study. It's only 5 days. There's obviously a lot more that I would love to do from a scientific perspective. This is just sort of a starting point. But what he did is he basically had people do these diets and then flip over and do the other diet. And he measured their microbiome every single day. And okay, let's track this. Let's see what happens in this microbiome. Here's what they found. So first of all, whatever diet you choose, the changes that you make in your diet will start to show up by tomorrow. Not a radical transformation in your microbiome, but there is a change. Your microbiome is changing that quickly within 24 hours. So that's really exciting. That's empowering. When people are on the plant-based diet, they saw basically increases in certain particular microbes. No surprise. These are the microbes that help us to break down and process fiber. If you were to look at these microbes, you would recognize many of the names. These are the same microbes that show up in many of our probiotic supplements. And the microbes were increasing the production of the short-chain fatty acids. And they actually saw that. They measured the short-chain fatty acids and saw that they increased. On the flip side, the animal product-based diet. Again, 5 days. I would never argue that in 5 days, someone is radically injuring their gut. You need to do more than that. But there were some changes that I would describe as concerning. So there was a shift towards specific microbes that we call them bilophilic. Bilophilic basically means that they do really well on a high-fat diet. And this includes ones that have been associated with inflammatory bowel disease or with colon cancer or other inflammatory conditions that, frankly, people don't want. So the shift that took place was not a shift that people would describe as being advantageous. Additionally, I thought this was kind of interesting. They noticed that people on the animal product-based diet started to develop antibiotic resistance. So, my question to the audience at home is, why would that happen? Why would the meat and the eggs and the dairy cause antibiotic resistance?
CAFO meat, antibiotics injected into the animals.
Getting pumped up. So, particularly in the States, 80% of antibiotics that are produced are not given to humans. 80% are used as a part of animal agriculture. And so those antibiotic residues, if they're coursing through the bloodstream of the animal, or if they are accumulating in the fat of the animal, then they are a part of that product. And it's disturbing to consider that people are just trying to eat food and developing antibiotic resistance because our agricultural practices and our food systems are making it that way. Like, that to me is problematic. So anyway, that's what
Before
we know.
you move on the other side to that coin too, you can imagine what those antibiotics are doing to the gut microbiome of that person.
100%.
So it's not only forming resistance against antibiotics if, those are used down the line, but you're destroying, my gut would tell me, no pun intended, that they're going to have an effect on your own gut microbiome in the present.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I do think that these gut health issues that exist, going back to an earlier question, like what has changed? These are complex questions. But when you start taking these individual things, here's one conversation, one point, antibiotics in the meat supply. And then we could talk about the ultra-processed foods and some of the chemicals that exist in there, right? And you just go down the line and it's like, unfortunately, these things, they really add up very quickly.
And while we're on that train of thought, one thing that just popped into my head too is when we're talking about processed foods, when we're using any kind of processing on food, it's going to change the structure of the fiber. And that's another whole thing. So if we're looking at different fruits and how they react with the microbiome in their whole form, if we're just chewing them versus putting them in a blender or a juicer, you talk about juicing in the book and how you're not a big fan of that. And we can get into the details. But even when you're making a smoothie, you're changing the structure of that fiber and it's going to act differently within the digestive system. So it's very, very complex, very nuanced. And yeah, again, this is such a new field and we're going to continue to learn so much in the coming years.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that processing our food is wrong. It also doesn't mean that eating raw is the only way. There's an interesting study that was done on this issue by someone named Peter Turnbaugh. He's a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. And basically what he did is he took the exact same food, but he served it once raw and once cooked. And cooking is a form of processing. So to me, this is why I use the expression ultra processed, because ultra processed is different than like processing. Processing is what we do at home. And so anyway, what he found was that when you serve literally the exact same food, but one raw and one cooked, you actually have different effects on the microbiome. And it's for the reasons that you just mentioned, which is that the food changes. A big part of what changes is the fiber. It's not only the fiber that changes, there's other things. Some people perhaps have noticed if you cook a tomato, it doesn't taste the same. It tastes very different. I actually find a cooked tomato to be a far more attractive flavor. And actually what's happening there is the cooking releases a phytochemical called lycopene, which is shown to reduce our risk of cancer and metabolic diseases. It's a beautiful thing. But it's an example of how food and food structure and chemicals, they change when we cook or process our food, and that will have different effects on the microbiome.
Yeah, important point there. It can go both ways. It's not just to the negative. It can release a chemical in a positive nature as well. If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I call this the golden rule because no matter who you are, no matter what dietary pattern you follow, this is something that you can apply. And I think it's very tangible, very easy to follow, and can be potentially game-changing for a while.